All right, for our next problem that I'd like to Python program with you is the pseudocode problem that we had from one of our last homework assignments in Chapter 3. We took all of this time to do this pseudocoding, and I think now hopefully you'll see the value of pseudocoding before you try to jump into Python. Maybe you saw in our last program that there was, Python syntax is a lot different than pseudocode syntax, and JavaScript is a lot different than Java syntax, and so forth. So the purpose of this pseudocode is to lay out our thoughts and organization so we don't have to worry about all of that syntax when we're trying to develop our logic and our program. And now what we're going to do is take all of that hard work that we put into our pseudocode, which I have here, and we're going to Python it. We're going to create code to generate this program that we created in pseudocode. So remember, we can open up open idle, which is it's going to open up our shell, our Python interpretive shell. But I don't want to stay in the shell. I can see that those have the chevrons, which means this is just going to run one line of code at a time. I'd like to print more than one, so I'm going to open, file, open, or I'm sorry, not open, I'm going to start a new one. You could open an old one, but I have to start a new one. And then I'll save it right off the bat, save as, and I'll put this on my desktop. And I think this was commission earned, so I'll call this file commission earned.py. All right, so now I've saved the file on my desktop at the .py extension, and I am ready to code. So if I look at my pseudocoding, it's all laid out already for me. So I'm going to walk through the logic as it's already been stepped out and figure out, try to apply syntax, Python syntax to that now. Remember that we're going to start off each of our blocks of code, all of our code with comments, and the comments have our author, Kirsten, Mark Lee. It has the date, today's September 19th, and it also has what our program is, the goal of our program, and this goal is to calculate commission earned. And you could, if you wanted to, programming challenges, chapter 3, number 1. So if you're turning in homework, you might want to notate what the problem was. All right, so our header has multiple lines of code, and so we use these 3 apostrophes to set aside this whole block as comments. I got that pretty green, so I know I did it correctly. All right, so the next thing I want to bring to your attention is we also did this thing called modularization. So we started putting our code into modules. And the main module is where all of our programs enter, where the program begins, and where it should end. And so we created this declares, and then where we declared our variables, and then we called our various input, processing, and output modules. Well, we're not at the point yet in Python where I'm going to show you how to do all of those modules, but I'm going to comment them in so that way I remember that I need to create a main module, just like I have done in my pseudocode. And we'll learn soon enough how to make that all happen. But for now, I'm just going to put it in comment. And remember, a single line of comment is started with the hashtag. All right, so first we declare our variables. And I'm looking here to see what our variables are. Looks like I've got 1, 2, 3 variables, and they're all floats. So I'll type out the variable name, amount. I'm going to give them floats. So this time I'm going to give them a 0.0 to indicate that that's a float. 0 would be an int. 0.0 is a float. I've got sales commission. I've got commission rate. There's rate equals 0, which is also a data type of a float. And I've got commission earned equals 0. Okay, I also want you to bring to your attention that I have purposely not done the capitals. The book does a lot of capitalization of the first letter, and usually when we write code, when we're creating variable names, we start with a lowercase. That's just good programming practice. The program Python will still run if you do it with the capital, but if you want to get along with your coworkers at work or with your teacher, then we all agree to certain standards, and one agreement is that variable names usually start with a lowercase, and then if you have a second word, since you can't make a space, that's not a valid variable name, I have to make it all one word, but to differentiate the second word, to make this more readable, we capitalize the second letter. This is called camel casing. So I've utilized a small lowercase and then the camel casing instead of, as the pseudocode showed, the capital S and the capital C for our variable names. So this is where I'm going to stray a little bit from the pseudocode. This is better practice. All right, so we've declared our variables. Now again, I don't have the ability yet to show you how to do these calls, but it's going to happen soon enough. So what I'm just going to do instead is, our first call is to the input data module. Okay, so the next line that we need to run, I'm just going to comment input data module, just so I have reference to which part of this pseudocode I'm working on. Remember, that's just commenting. And the first line says I have to write out this information. So I'm just going to copy this because I don't want to type it all. So I'm going to copy it. And how do you put information, display information to the screen in Python? Well, remember the word print. Got to spell it right. Got that pretty coloring, so I know I did it right. Parenthesis. I have to make sure I have an opening and closing parenthesis. And inside that parenthesis, I'm going to put my quotes. Notice that I've got funny coloring because I didn't put some quotes. So start paying attention to the coloring to make sure that it's doing what you expect it to do. This is a literal string, means literally what's inside of these quotes is what I want you to print to the screen. And I think what I'll do, just for good measure, is I'm going to run this right now. It looks like it did what I expected it to do. It just made that output. The reason why that's good is it's always a good idea to check ahead of time. Let's say I left off this quotes. And then I wrote a bunch of other code down here. So a bunch of other code, which obviously is not valid code. But then all of a sudden I ran it and I got an error message, which is what's going to happen. Oh, well, in this particular case, I got lucky and it pointed to this exact line. But very soon, as you write a lot of code, if you have a whole bunch, sometimes it's hard to know where to look for your problem. So if you build this in small pieces and run it and test it, when something does go wrong, then you'll say, well, it worked 3 lines ago, so this line must have been where my problem is. Believe me, if you pick up on this now, it's going to save you tons of hair pulling and gray hair in the future, so probably some bad words and so forth. All right, so I know that this line is working, so I'm going to try the next line. It says input sales amount. So I'm going to flash the screen in all different kinds of colors. Oops, sorry. All right, so I'm going to, oh, where did it go? Sorry, I got all discombobulated there. Yes, that's a word. Okay, so now I'm going to input sales amount. So let's see, I need to put in the word input. And we agreed that I have to, if I get an input, that I have to put it into a variable, and we've said that the variable is sales amount, say LES amount. And then equals means put that, the return value of input, into this variable. Always variables on the left, calculations or input on the right. But what does this come over? This comes over as a string, and I need to convert it into a float. So we need to use that word, instead of int this time, we're going to use float. Oops. And I'm going to surround this whole input with a float. So now, oh, I got to spell float right. It's not a float. It would be a float. There we go. So now when this code is run, input is going to get fired off first. So this will get executed. The program will halt. It'll wait for a user to put something in at the keyboard. That value is returned. Float catches it, so to speak. Float says, oh, I've got to turn whatever that is into a floating point or a decimal. And it puts that value into sales amount. So now sales amount receives a float that was entered at the keyboard. Okay, so then we're going to test our code. Print parentheses sales amount. Let's just make sure it worked. Remember, doing it in bits and pieces. Run module, enter the total sales amount. Well, 21,123. Let's see if that worked. It printed it out. And notice the 0.0, so it knows that it is a floating point. It gave it a decimal because I told it that's what kind of data type it is. Now we'll learn soon enough, I know this is getting kind of old, but we have to be patient. We'll learn soon enough how we can format this to make it prettier, but for now we're just going to let it do whatever it wants to do, and we're happy knowing that there's a decimal at the end of it. Okay, so let's see what line is next. It says, enter the total commission amount. Okay, so now I'm going to show you a little trick. in the past, let's see, I wrote print, and then I'm going to copy this because I don't feel like typing it in. Control copy, Control V. We've done this, and then the next line is our input statement. Remember that? All right, so here's a little shortcut that's kind of cool with, we did this up here. So here's kind of a cool thing that we can do with Python. So I'm going to take the word print away. Actually, let me comment. This is a good idea. Let me make this syntactically correct. It's not. Okay, so if I run this, it will work. Let's just make sure. I just want to show you this point here. Enter the sales amount, 21,123 and 50 cents. Why not? It worked. Okay, so everything's happy. Enter the total commission rate. All right, I want to make a change. I'm going to do this a little differently. And so I don't want to delete this code because I want to save it for reference. Maybe I want to come back to it later. So remember, I can comment it out, which means that I can still keep it on the screen. I can use it later if I want to by just taking out that hashtag. But I'm going to keep it here just for a visual to help us remember that it was there, or give you a visual on where we're going or where we came from. So that's kind of a neat trick when you get further along, just commenting out some lines of code that you don't want to work, just so you can practice some other things or whatever you might have. All right. So my point here is, instead of doing this print line and then sales amount and then get input, turns out we can do something else. We can take that input and we can put in directly, remember those parentheses? We can put that prompt right into, if I can get there, Control V, we can put that prompt right in that parenthesis. So in essence, this is doing two things at once. It's printing out the prompt that we wanted to do with that print line before. So this prompt gets printed, but the input will still wait for a value to be returned. So it's doing both things at once, which is a lot quicker and easier to write than writing a print statement and then another line for input. So this line is printing out the prompt and my literal, and then it waits at the keyboard, waits for a return value, which means we have to put this into a variable, don't we? Sales amount is equal to, all right, fantastic. But didn't we just say that, got another problem here, and that is sales amount is supposed to be, oh, it's not a sales amount. What am I looking for here? Commission rate. Enter the commission rate. So I used the wrong variable. That's naughty. You don't do that. Commission rate. There we go. So, but we said that commission rate needs to be a floating point, decimal, and input returns a string. So it prompts, it gets a value, returns it as a string, which means I then have to convert this all to a float. So I'm going to do that conversion again with the word float. I'm going to surround the input by the parentheses. I get that happy opening and closing brackets. In fact, if I do it at the end, it should do the whole thing. Oops, wrong one. Braces, not braces, there we go. Yep, looks like it's doing what it's supposed to. All right, so I've got opening and closing parentheses here, that's good. I've got an opening and closing parentheses here, that looks good. All right, so now let us see if we print out commission rate. Oh, I spelled commission wrong, didn't I? Commission rate. Okay, so let me spell it correctly. Okay, it won't work if I spell it incorrectly because those are two separate variables. All right, so let's see if this works. So enter IR 2,550 cents. Enter the total commission rate as a percentage. So you can see that it did in fact prompt me with a prompt with that string. It's waiting for me to put in a value. So I'll put in, I don't know, I should make 50% worth of commission. Why not? All right, so then I get an error message. What is the error message saying? Commission rate is not defined. Let's see if I misspelled something. Commission rate. Print commission rate. So it's trying to print something that it didn't get a value for. So it says that's the error message, sorry. I didn't expect the error message, so I have to troubleshoot. That's why you see me hemming and hawing a little bit. But what this is telling me is that on line 23, I don't see a line 23. How do I know which one line 23 is? Well, I'm pretty sure I can go to, if I can't just count, I can go to line 23, and I can see which line it's upset about. Well, it's upset about this line. So what it's telling me is that commission rate has no value in it. It's saying you're using it, but I don't see any input. You haven't given me a value, which means that even though we've spelled the name correctly, commission rate, I'm pretty sure that's spelled the same. If I copy and paste that in, oh, looks like I didn't spell it correctly. So now if I run it, 25,550 cents, enter the total commission, 20%. Okay, so apparently I have to look back in the video. Apparently I misspelled commission rate in this particular print. And so that's a good example of the fact that you better make sure that you, and I ended up copying and pasting it in here, make sure that you spell your variable names the same. Otherwise you get this nasty error. So where did I spell? Oh, I left out an I. Commission. That's not how you spell I spelled commission. So that was my error. All right, so that's good. I meant to do that mistake. I did not. But that's part of the program is you're gonna make mistakes. So how do you get out of it? Well, now we've seen. Okay, so let's see. We're almost done with this program. Let's see what else we've got to do. So I look back at my pseudocode, and it says that I have to do, let's see, I did my input. So this is all part of my input. Next is input my commission rate, so I finished that. Now we need to perform our calculations, so let's get that done. I'm going to comment this out, perform calculations module. And it says set commission earned. So there's my formula. Commission, make sure you spell commission right. Commission earned is equal to sales amount. Isn't it nice having this already done? Now I don't have to worry about the logic. I don't have to worry about all the syntax trying to figure out how to do this in Python. All I've got to do is take the logic and try to convert it. So let's see. So busy talking. Commission SION rate divided by 100. Incidentally, I leave spaces in between the operators just to make it easier to read. All right, so commission earned is equal to sales amount. Looks like I'm probably missing something here, and that would be a multiplication. There we go. Okay, so sales amount, so that matches my formula. And then I also need an output results. So output results module. And we're going to output the result, which is right. That. No, okay. Print the total commission earned is $, close my quotes, make a space for readability, concatenate, or you can put a comma, whichever you want to do in Python, and then add the value that was calculated in commission earned, close my parenthesis, get that nice little gray block, and that should be good to go. Let's see, let's run it, and let's see what happens. Enter the total sales earned for the month. Let's say I earned $2,500, or sold $2,500. Enter the total commission rate as a percentage. Well, I think I should earn 50%. And where did I get my error now? So it's telling me on line 29, it doesn't like something that I've done. Must be string, not float. Oh, okay. So what it's trying to tell me, let's see if we can do this. So what it's trying to tell me is that it sees that this is a float, it sees that this is a string, and it doesn't know how to join those together with a plus sign. It says, I don't know how to join a plus. I don't know how to add a plus I don't know how to add a float to a string. So I think the way we can get around that, instead of plussing it, let's just put the comma in there, and let's see if that works. Oops, wrong place. So run module, enter the sales amount, 25. Oops, please, may I type? 21. Oh, I'm not sure what I've done wrong here, but I didn't run it properly, so I'm going to run it again. Run module. Okay, enter the total sales amount, 2,500. It wouldn't let me put that in last time. Enter the total commission rate. I should make 50%. And the total earned is 10,750. So I should probably test it to make sure that that is correct. Calculator. Always should check your work. Always make sure that the output is what you expected. We're checking for a logic error. Was my calculation logically correct? So if I had 21,500 and I multiply that by 50% times 50% equals 10,750. The commission earned is 10,750. So it looks like my calculation is correct. So I don't have any compile errors. I was able to run it. And I don't have any logic errors because my output is what I expected. Whew, that was a lot, but we got through it, and I think hopefully now you're starting to see the value of pseudocoding. By laying out my logical steps, I don't have to make I don't have to think about all of that stuff, and all I have to do is translate what I've already created into the Python syntax. So that is Pythoning programming challenge number 1. Let's look at another one in the next video.